Dear friends, let me first thank Kostadinka Kuneva for the invitation, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm very happy to be here. Over the past year in the European Parliament, we worked with Kostadinka on creating the platform for cooperation in tackling undeclared work. And this is something which I believe is important to follow, because now the decision has been taken to start implementing this platform. Therefore, I'm sorry I will not be able to be here for the third panel, which has to do with undeclared work. I would like to excuse myself that I have to leave right after I finish my speech, because I have to catch a plane back to Sofia. On the subject of collective agreements and the European institutional framework, collective agreements over the past 25 years, according to research by Eurofound, include two very different periods as to number and duration. From 1990 up to the crisis of 2008, both the number of collective agreements and their average duration showed little change. In contrast, since the crisis, there has been a clear drop in the average duration of agreements concluded. Furthermore, all the countries where the number of collective agreements has clearly declined are located in Central and Eastern Europe or in Southern Europe. Countries where collective bargaining takes place mostly at the company level, or countries that after 2008 experienced a sudden and disorganized decentralization in bargaining, such as Greece, Portugal, and Spain, recorded the biggest decreases in the number of collective agreements. The same study points out that these were countries where structural reforms and the, quote, modernization of collective bargaining systems, unquote, were repeatedly requested by various international institutions and the European authorities in exchange for financial support programs. The result? A clear bargaining imbalance in favor of the employer that prevents reaching agreements for a functioning balance of interests between workers and employers that would also support wider objective of social cohesion and fairness. The research mentioned identifies several longer-term trends in collective bargaining underlying these changes in the numbers and the type of agreements reached. First, this is the declining coverage of workers and companies by collective agreements, which has accelerated after 2008 and is expected to continue at a more or less steady pace. Second, the decentralization of multi-level bargaining systems towards the company level has increasingly led to individualization, fragmentation, and disorganization in negotiations for collective agreements. Third, the favorability principle, according to which standards agreed at a higher level can only be improved but not worsened at the lower level, has been seriously weakened. Specifically, both Greece and Portugal, after 2008, had to introduce new rules that allowed company-level agreements to derogate from higher-level agreements. Fourth, deviations from collective agreements have become much more intensive since 2008. These have included opening clauses, opt-outs, or other forms of issue-specific deviations. The European institutional framework since 2008 has in general been supporting and facilitating these negative developments regarding collective agreements. This has been happening in clear deviation from basic European law and international law, despite also, for instance, the fact that at the beginning of the last decade, back in 2002, a high-level group of experts assembled by the European Commission concluded that enhancing competitiveness while preserving the European social model becomes a crucial issue for the European Union. The group's report emphasized the role of collective bargaining in this regard and the need, therefore, to actively support social partners in order to ensure that industrial relations function effectively at both European and national levels. Nevertheless, especially after 2008, EU institutions have instead been actively promoting the type of structural reforms that has directly been weakening collective representation and the bargaining power of organized labor, as well as the role of collective bargaining itself. This has been achieved by the actual institutionalization of austerity at the European level. As has been shown by numerous analyses, the enhanced economic governance and the European semester produced introduced a series of wide-ranging and radical reforms at European level, making budget cuts and labor market quote-unquote flexibility the cornerstones of anti-crisis policies. In particular, the so-called Euro Plus Pact emphasizes the need for flexibility, reducing union labor costs, and decentralizing wage bargaining as leading goals for policy coordination. Furthermore, as research has shown, it was the European Union component in the loan agreements with the countries most affected by the crisis that was systematically and explicitly been used to legally base the loan conditionality in MOUs. The defining goal of the mechanism introduced under the new procedures in general, and in particular for countries receiving loans, has been the promotion of, quote, internal devaluation, with the argument that this will restore competitiveness in terms of unit labor costs. So how to regain the lost ground in Greece and in Europe? Lately, there has been a growing awareness that the result of ever greater decreasing coverage, decentralization, deviation, and derogation of collective agreements has been a growing imbalance in labor relations. This, in turn, is destroying social cohesion, deeply harming employment and working conditions, and causing ever more drastic income and wealth inequalities. As a result, there has been an increasing range of actions that have been more and more actively discussed and undertaken throughout Europe. It is most important today to mobilize full support and expand efforts across the whole front of such action. There has been in-depth discussion of the possibilities for legal action through international courts within the EU and the Council of Europe. Despite the doubts that they are mostly unwilling to accept cases and pronounce clearly in favor of applying union and international law in favor of collective labor rights, there must be constant representation with thorough argumentation, making courts perform their duties as required by law. Obviously, however, it is above all policies and practices that must be decisively challenged and changed in order to restore the respect and application of the full range of rights to collective organization, collective bargaining, and collective action in full compliance with the basic principles and norms of the European social model. The right to industrial action, including strikes, must be defended and strengthened as the decisive factor for regaining the lost ground of employment and social prerequisites for a decent life for working people, without which, unavoidably, labor is reduced to begging. However, it is also obvious that without strong, increasing political support, the struggle by labor to regain lost ground has little, if no chance, to succeed. Therefore, the initiative of the European Trade Union Confederation to launch a two-stage campaign to enlist such support, both in the European Parliament and in national legislatures, must be vigorously supported. And in conclusion, a final point. There is also the battle of intellectual argument that has to be fought and won. The central argument for further flexibility and fragmentation of the labor market, repeated over and over ad nauseum, comes down to the need to maintain competitiveness. However, As serious research has shown, even back in the 70s of last century, the stability and high level of protection in labor law were in fundamental compatibility with the competitiveness agenda. This was due to the recognized effect of beneficial constraints of labor market regulation, importantly including collective bargaining, meaning constraint over the destructive profit-maximizing drive of capital. At present, it is precisely those countries that have preserved the norms and policies of such constraint that are also proving to be the most competitive and successful in adapting to globalization thanks to their well-functioning industrial and labor systems. Therefore, in order to regain lost ground, along with all other lines of action, it is ever more important to expose and reject the completely false paradigm of austerity and the kind of restructuring being forced on societies under the mantra of competitiveness. This is vitally important in order to gain the support of all those 99% that are being deprived of a life in security and dignity by being fooled that lack of flexibility and intransigence on the part of labor are the causes of their hardships. The wisdom, quote unquote, of divide and rule must fall before the force of solidarity and social justice. Thank you.